3 years ago now, or so it seems. Maybe 2016. I'm pretty sure I got my year right. I was a junior in high school, and just got out of high school. It was roughly in the evening time, maybe 4 or 5, and so I went off into the woods, goofing around, taking selfies, and just enjoying some fresh air before heading home for the evening. This is in the state of Maryland, and as you know, Maryland isn't really big. But as I'm sitting on this log, trying to take a good selfie, I heard something large approaching me, directly ahead of me. I put my cell phone down, listening, and hearing something approaching more and more. Whatever it was, I could tell was incredibly large. I was curious and stood up, getting ready to guard my ground, thinking it was probably a homeless person, and that maybe I had somehow stumbled upon their little encampment, despite there being any evidence of any homeless camps, tents, or belongings. And that's when I began to see this massive black shape appearing more and more throughout the trees. The closer it came, the more details I could see. I clearly realized this was not a person in any way, shape, or form. The closer this thing came, the more I could see this was some sort of demented animal-looking thing. Its eyes were the first thing that drew me in. They were kind of yellow and gold, and had a weird shape to them, and they stared back at me, very strangely, and I could see, through the light that I had, that this thing had horns on its head. Not like a devil, but more like a ram or a goat. It was very strange looking. Because it was so dark, the creature, not the lighting, I couldn't see every little nook and cranny of detail. But I could tell you it was dark, had very dark hair, and a very long face. It kind of just stared at me, watching me from behind a few trees, covered enough by brush that it was somewhat concealed. I've heard of stories of the Maryland Goatman before, but I always just used to think it was tales. Stories spread by kids trying to scare other kids. Or maybe just a good ghost story to get everybody spooked. And there's always folklore and legends of the land that get around. But like I said, I was never a believer. But after this experience, I can firmly say I do believe that the Maryland Goatman exists. And I saw it with my own eyes. This thing was hideous, and it was watching me. I feel like had I stayed there, I could tell it was planning on doing something. What? I don't know. But I noped out of there before I could ever give it a chance to act on it. Luckily, it didn't follow me, as I was pretty close to a road that took me back to my house. I don't go in those woods anymore. For the rest of that year, my senior year, and afterwards, I know it's around, and I do not want to give it a chance to meet me firsthand. Last summer, I was with my dad out fishing on a small pond, and as we were coming back up on shore, something charged us. Whatever this something was on 2 legs, covered in gray hair, very long hair, and kind of looked like a goat. I know that sounds weird, but that's what I saw. Luckily, I had my 9mm on me. Not enough to do much damage, but it's better than nothing. I mean, I nearly only brought my pocket knife. I'm glad at the last minute I decided against it. Now, we were coming back on shore, having been out on the pond for probably 4.5 hours at this point. As I was getting out, helping my dad out, I hear some rustling in the bushes, probably about 100 feet away from me, all the way to my left. This puzzled me and my father, because we were in an area where there shouldn't be any large animals coming through. I mean, here in Texas, you get all sorts of stuff, but this kind of commotion was too noisy. It was almost man-like or man-made, as if somebody was intentionally trying to make as much noise as they possibly could. That's when this thing charged out of the brush at my father and I, while my father getting out of the boat and I helping him out. Just out of reaction, I reached in, my coat, pulled out my 9mm, fired a couple shots directly at this thing, which, by the way, was much taller than me and my father. I'm 6'2". My dad's 5'9". Don't ask me where I got my height. I think it's from my mom's side of the family. I'm pretty sure I hit this thing point blank. It was probably maybe 60, 50 feet away from me as I fired all 3 shots. That's when it stopped and darted off in a different area of the forest, making an even more horrendous scream than when it came out. Whatever it was acted pissed. I don't know where it came from or why it decided to charge us. For all I know, it could have been sitting there in the woods surrounding the pond, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't even want to think about that. I'm very fortunate that it at least waited until we got back on shore to try and attack. Had we been in the water, and this thing could have jumped onto our boat or tried to capsize us, I don't know if we'd be here telling you the story. The main purpose in me writing you this email isn't necessarily just to tell you my story. I want to try and identify what it is that I saw. It was easily maybe 8 to 9 feet tall, and I don't think it was a Bigfoot or any other cryptid that I've heard you talk about. This thing was something else entirely. It had a very elongated face, kind of had hair that drooped down, large, sharp teeth that protruded from each end of its mouth, kind of like canines, but a little bit different, and had weird red eyes. Not like Hollywood monster glowing eyes. These were a deep red. And I'm trying to sit here and think as I type this, what kind of animal has eyes like this? No, oh well, I guess it escapes me. But the eyes weren't glowing or anything supernatural looking. They looked natural. And its head was shaped more like a stag, if that makes any sense. It also had horns protruding from the very top of its head that reminded me somewhat between a ram and a gazelle. Its lower body was more slender and lankier, where its upper body was more built, wider, and had some rippling muscles on the front part of it. It all happened so fast, so I didn't get to sit there and study it and observe every little bit of this animal. But whatever it was, even though I shot it point blank 3 times, didn't even seem to react to my bullets. It seemed to be startled by the noises of the gunshots more than anything else. I didn't see any blood, so I want to say I got it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I got it. I shot it 3 times, from about 50 feet away, but I saw no blood come from the wound, or drip down, or any sort of blood trail. So I'm not exactly sure how to explain that. That in itself is kind of a supernatural feat. After it took off, bolting off into the woods, I could hear it screaming and screaming as it ran off in a distance. It wasn't a kind of scream, like in pain. It was more like an angry scream. I don't know how to describe it. And the sound of the scream, well, if I could replay it for you, it would make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It was something otherworldly. After it ran off, I quickly helped pull my dad out of the boat, as he's older, and him and I nearly just looked at each other, wondering, what in the hell was that thing? But we both agreed we should get our boat back onto the truck and get out of there as fast as we could, in case this thing decided to come back, or worse, bring a couple buddies with him. So we took about 10 minutes, loading the boat back and getting everything we had back in the truck, and we took off out of there, making sure to not leave anything behind that we would need to come retrieve later on. And that would have been a mess. The area in which this whole event occurred was northeastern Texas. I hope this finds you well, and I hope you can help me properly identify exactly what this creature was. This story that I'm about to tell you occurred last year in 2019 on March 5th. I'll never forget it. I was driving outside of Louisville, Kentucky, when I saw this bizarre-looking animal walking on its hind legs across the road, dragging a dead deer. I'm not sure if the deer was already dead, roadkill, or if this thing killed it, but it seemed to pay no mind to me. I came upon it slowly, and even ended up having to halt my vehicle, pressing fully on my brakes as this thing casually strode and went across the road. It paid no attention to try and hurry and rush. It just took its time, dragging this deer. I couldn't help but watch in horror, trying to figure out what exactly I was looking at. Could this have been a person in a Halloween costume? It's not really likely. The area I was in was pretty rural, and virtually zero communities around where I was. Well, maybe not zero communities, but houses were pretty spread out. There would be no incentive for anybody to be out here this late at night, dragging a dead deer off into the woods, across the road. It just didn't make any sense. Because it walked so slowly, I got a very good look at it. It was covered in long, gray, strangly hair, had a very elongated face, like that of a horse or maybe a goat, except much, much uglier. It had strange eyes. They were kind of more human-like. It's hard to say, but I can clearly remember its gait and how weird it kind of hobbled around. I didn't see its lower half really as much as I did its upper half, but its posture almost reminded me of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. It had a terrible hunch in its back, and I immediately thought this creature might have scoliosis, if that's what it was. But it just had one arm behind it, dragging the deer, and paying no mind to my vehicle, looking directly ahead, and just casually pulling this deer along. As soon as it crossed the road, it disappeared into the forest, and that was that. I sat there for a minute, trying to process and fully digest what it is that I just saw. Clearly, this had to have been an elaborate prank, with a $2,000 Halloween costume. There's no way this was real. I continued driving, thinking about what I saw nonstop, and every conclusion I could come to made no sense of why a person would be doing just that. It had to have been something other than a person. An animal. But I've never seen an animal that looked like that. After a short amount of time, I gave up on putting so much mental energy and focus on it, and just contributed to another freaky thing that happened in my life. After discovering the whole scary story thing, and listening to monsters and cryptids, and knowing more now what I do than I did then, I'm almost certain I saw a GOATMAN